I'm Casey Cowdery. This video is to let you know a few ideas about how to use these cut and sew patterns. You will be making toys and pillows and dolls like these. XKids printed fabric patterns are available in my shop on Spoonflower. Search on Spoonflower using my name, Casey Cowdery, this is me, or you can search for XKids. The characters in these cut and sew patterns are from my XKids collection. This set of cut and sew patterns comes in two sizes. They are a fat quarter at 18 by 21 inches, and that's the printed size. There are 10 patterns at this size. And then this one is Fashionistas. That's another fat quarter. And then the other size is a full yard at 36 by 42 inches. As I mentioned, there are 10 patterns, 10 different character patterns, one in the fat quarter size and one in the 1 yard size. Two of the 1 yard size patterns have a design for a youth pillowcase or a cushion cover. The Conga Line Girls and the Red Kick right here behind me have that option. Cheater quilt tops and yard goods will be available too, coming soon. This group of cut and sew projects is a little different. These patterns can be top stitched, so no snipping and notching the seam allowances and turning. I don't like turning. They are quick and easy enough for children who are just learning to sew. If you prefer to snip and turn, that is an option for you too. Polyester batting or polyester fiber fill are recommended. These are for children and may require trips through the washer and dryer. My suggestion is to watch this entire video before you cut the motifs. As you order on Spoonflower, you must choose the size that you want, fat quarter or a full yard. For instance, on this pattern, Party Time, the cushion that's part of the design is about 23 inches, right there. And that's on the full yard. And on the fat quarter, it's about 13 inches, so roughly half, not quite, but roughly half. Either size, I think, is quite appropriate. It just depends on what it is that you would like for your children. And you will be asked which fabric you would like. The designer's recommendation will fill in the blank, but you can change it. My recommendation is the Petal Signature cotton. These designs were made with the Petal Signature cotton or the cotton poplin. In my opinion, the Petal Signature cotton seems just a little better to me, just a little bit. It's whiter and very slightly thicker. Also, it irons a little more easily. Speaking of ironing, Spoonflower recommends that you wash new printed fabrics inside a Delicates bag on the Delicates cycle of your washing machine. Most of mine were washed in bags, but a few didn't fit. The ones that didn't fit were so much easier to iron. So when I wash Signature Petal Cotton or Cotton Poplin again, I'll use the Delicate cycle but skip the bags. For other fabrics, it might be a good idea to use the bag. See this border? It looks like a gracefully twisted ribbon to me, so I will call it the ribbon or the ribbon border. These are a few options for construction that occur to me. It's likely you will think of additional methods. Machine straight stitch to the outside of the ribbon border. Machine satin stitch the edges. Hand embroider using the blanket stitch or a fancier stitch. Or you can place right sides together and machine stitch to snip and turn. This single line that is to the outside of the ribbon is the seam allowance line. Cut on that line for most options. You can always cut it off. And this is what I'm suggesting that you do. Cut between the ribbon and the seam allowance line. Make a pattern of paper or cardstock so that you don't have to use cutout motifs to cut batting. It's possible that you could damage the motifs. A pattern that can be remade of paper or cardstock is especially important when a young person is making the project. You don't want to have a disaster right at the beginning of the project. This is plain old copy paper, and this is cardstock, a little thicker than paper, still easy to handle. So pin your motif to the paper or the cardstock and use sharp straight pins. And then draw around the motif. I've gotten started doing that. You can see that here. And we'll just finish it up. So just draw right around. Use a pencil, not a pen. You don't want blobs of ink on your motif either. All right, that's that. And pull out your pins. And set your motif aside. That way it's out of danger. Use your shears. Well, use your kitchen scissors. And just cut around your motif. And then cut all the way around. Pin the pattern to the batting and just cut around it. And it does not have to be cut perfectly to shape. If you miss by a little bit, no problem. That's a little far off, so I'm going to give it another try. There we go. And here's one that has been cut. Don't cut with your motif on the batting. You're trying to avoid that with the pattern. And then you're ready to assemble your cut and sew project. Because snip and turn is so commonly used, I won't give instructions. It's likely you already know how to make that option. To me, turning and getting the edges to look nice with that method, well, it's just something I just don't like to do. If you are good at satin stitching along an edge, that is a good option. I am beyond not good at satin stitching along an edge, so I will not demo that. However, here are a few tips that I think might be helpful. A walking foot is always a good idea when you're trying to keep things in alignment. This color blends, this medium blue, neutral blue, not going towards the green, which would be turquoise-ish, or going towards the purple. It seems to blend nicely with all of the various colors in the gradient. Also, keep your satin stitch narrow enough that it doesn't go into the ribbon. I don't think that would look very nice. The seam allowances are wide enough that you should be able to avoid that easily. The minor downside to top stitching is that you must cut a little more carefully. The cut edges will be exposed. These are the steps for machine top stitching. For children learning to sew, don't use the batting. And plan to stuff your pieces with fiberfill. Use plenty of fiberfill. If pieces are not firmly stuffed, they are likely to have a lumpy surface like this. This is what I mean by a lumpy surface. This is just fiberfill inside some cotton fabric. These were made as outdoor cushions, so there wasn't a whole lot of finesse needed. And you can see that the fabric has been faded, but you probably don't want this for your projects. For those with experience, to avoid the lumpy look and not stuff so firmly, use a layer of batting on each side. Most batting has a smoother side. If you would like to add fiberfill, be sure to place the smoothest side to the center of your layers. Now this looks like the unsmooth side, and this looks like the smooth side. So I'm going to switch them around so that they are to the center, and you'll get this all aligned, and you'll put it under the machine as an experienced person, and you will stitch them together. Now my preference is to baste, definitely pin But basting, this stuff shifts around. If you feel confident not using basting, that's perfectly fine, but I think that the basting is very helpful. And this is a stitched motif. You can see that I'm inside the edge of the piece where it's been cut by about 1/2 inch. I used my presser foot as a guide and just went all the way around and left an opening to put the fiber fill in there. Very thick batting is more difficult to get under the presser foot, and it may make the seam allowance edges puffier than you like anyway. So fiber fill is probably a good idea. An aside here about the color of the thread to use to top stitch. The color change with the gradient from light to dark means that you're not going to be able to match the thread to the fabric. You could use invisible thread, or I opted to use a contrasting thread color, similar to the color of this XKids motif here. It actually is blended rather nicely. It's a yellow, and it just seems to be fine. It shows up more on the dark and less on the light part of the pattern. Because you can see the ribbon border, you might be tempted to stitch right on its line, but that doesn't work well because you can't see what's on the other side. It is the same pattern on both sides, but it's not going to match up absolutely. There's going to be a little bit of shifting, and I don't know about you, but if it's not right on, I'm not going to like it. This is the point where we trim the batting from between the layers of the seam allowance, and I've already started trimming back here, so it's pretty thin back here. The reason that we want to do this, is taking the bulk out from between these two layers, is so that it doesn't snag on things as the toy is being played with. It will make the edges lie a little flatter, but again, as the toy is being played with, that's not going to stay in position. So here is a bulkier part right here. So I am going to try to get that out of there. I thought a hard surface would be the way to do this, but you might find you want to do it in your lap. I'll leave that up to you. Okay, we're coming along here. All right, let's see what we got. And I think an iron, cool iron, maybe on a wool setting, would flatten things out a little bit if you want to. I don't think it's really necessary though, because as I said, as the toy is being played with, it's going to get some pretty heavy-duty abuse. And as you know, you need roughly about a 4-inch opening for fiber fill. I may have tightened myself up a little bit there, not too much. All right, and then you're going to want to stuff the heck out of this baby and just keep going and going. And I found that a knitting needle, both the pointed end and the blunt end, are handy. Well, sometimes they're handy. I guess you gotta stuff more in there before it's handy enough. And then just keep stuffing until you get it to the point that you want. I'm going to push it down here into the, well, my knitting needle isn't working so well, so I'm going to stick my hand in here and I'm going to push it down into this head section, and it's fairly wide open, but it needs to have some little encouragement here. And then the same over here. And then when you get that fiber fill into the position that you want, you get some more and you just keep going. The hand embroidered blanket stitch or another fancier stitch is more for decoration on pieces that are for show and not for play. A tossed pillow on a child's bed or wall decorations are good candidates. Use whatever thread color you like, matching or contrasting. You can see some yellow here and some higher contrast on this one, and here we're pretty low contrast, and that color selection is up to you. However, if you're new at this or for children, blending color to the background, it will hide inconsistencies. This is a fun way for children to learn embroidery too, and they will get a more successful project in the end if they get a blending color. Stack motifs with batting between to the thickness that you like. This is motif, 2 layers of low loft batting, and then the back side of the motif there. Tuck in any batting that you see poking out, and you pin or baste the layers together. Pinning, again, use sharp pins, and then I tuck the little tip of the pin back into the fabric. Now, I just shove this in as I'm going along, but for anybody that's new to this, and especially for children, you'll probably want to baste like this is, and then trim off the excess batting so that it doesn't get in their way, and it's a easy, fun thing for them to do. Another advantage to basting is that pin pokes are not fun, and you want them to have an enjoyable experience, so basting is a much better idea. This is 6-ply embroidery floss. What I found works well here is 3 plies of the 6. And the preferred way to separate them is to pull out 3 strands. And here I have one, if I can get a hold of it, and pull it out. Now it's going to snag on me. Great. So there is 1 strand, and then 2. Must be a little slub in the thread, and then 3, and that gives us 1 bundle here. Some people would pull those apart and put them back together, which is probably a good idea. You get fluffier thread that way. And then the thing that you do is you align these like so. And here's my 3rd one. And you align them, and then you thread them in a needle. So threading your needle, I do put the tail end into my mouth to wet it and stick the strands together. Some people think that is not the right thing to do. I do keep the wetted end as my tail, so it doesn't actually go into the finished work. I don't know if that's a big deal or not, but that's what I do. A knot that is often used by experienced people, the quilters taught me this one, is that you put the tail of the thread on your forefinger, your right forefinger if you're right-handed, left if you're left-handed, and you trap it with your needle, and then you wrap it around as many times as you want. If you want a really small knot, then you don't wrap it very many times. If you want a larger knot, then you wrap it more times. I wrap this one 4 times, and then hold it with your thumbnail and pull it down, and then you just pull it all the way down to the end, You can see that it's not quite tight, so I just pull it tight. Now I do even up the bottom threads like that. My signature is to leave the tails on. That's just what I do. You can decide if you want to cut them off or not. That's up to you. You can do any stitch that you like, but I'm going to show you the basic blanket stitch. I think it works well. It does help with it does help with fraying, but then on the other hand, it is a little bit fragile, so that's the best idea. So this being the front, because we can see her face, and I'm going to turn it over to the back, and we're going to shove this down, this batting down in here a little bit farther, and then pin again. And then I'm going to come into the back of the work, just like this. And I'm starting down here because I'm going to arrange this to have fiberfill put inside between my two layers of batting. So I'm going to go through there like that, all the way to the front, turn it over, and I'm going to pull it through, and you're not going to see my thread come off the top of the screen, but I pulled it through until it's tight. So it's snug, the knot is snugged up to the back there. And then I'm going to stretch over just a little bit for my next stitch, and this is something that you just kind of get used to doing. And I'm going to go through, but I'm not going to push the needle all the way through, and I'm going to loop the thread under the needle and pull it back towards myself, and then I'm going to pull that all the way through. This is how you start a thread, and I'm going to pull it pretty snug, but not entirely snug. I want to leave just a little bit of slack to be used by the very last stitch. And then I'm going to go on around. I'm going to skip some more space for my next stitch, and then bring the thread under the needle, pull it all the way through, and this one I'm going to pull up a little bit more snug, and that is snug, not scrunching, but snug. So that is how you do the blanket stitch, and you would just keep going around. And I have some other things started here that I'm going to show you how to continue working when you run out of thread, because your thread is not going to last the entire distance all the way around here. When you get to the point where you're running out of thread, now I would ordinarily use this thread for a few more stitches, but in an effort for you being able to see it, I thought I'd leave it a little longer. So I'm going to go into the work as if I were doing another stitch, and with this particular method I have to look to the back to make sure I'm getting into the right place on the ribbon on the back, which I am, and then bring the thread under the needle as always and pull it up snugly, again snugly, just like you would if it was a stitch. Then turn your work over and go to the bottom of that last stitch and knit 2 little anchor stitches, just tiny, catch a couple, 3 threads and pull them through, and you want to do that twice, and you have to kind of get your stitch aligned there because it's wanting to there we go. And if it doesn't quite line up, you can move it over just like I did. You saw me move that with my thumbnail. And that was one anchor stitch, and here is another. I know you can't see all of that when I get my hand in the way. Okay, so you've got 2 anchor stitches there. So then you want to go right in there, right next to your anchor stitches, but only go through 1 layer of the fabric and then bring it up between the 2, like that. and then pull it up snugly. And you're going to cut it off here. And the reason that you don't cut it off at the anchor stitches is because the thread will loosen, just a hint. And if you cut it off right there at your anchor stitches, they're going to come loose and unwind. So this way you've got a little bit of a length of thread in between those two, and it's just going to hang out there and be perfectly happy. So then to start your new thread, I've threaded the needle with the same identical thread. You come through from the back to the front, right there at your anchor stitches, and try to come up right at the bottom of your last stitch, just like that. Okay, and then we're going to pull that all the way through so the knot is snugged up on the back side. And then we're going to turn again and take the blunt end of your needle and go under the top bar of your last stitch and pull your thread all the way through. And you can get those two threads to snug up against each other. And then you find the needle again, and you just keep going like you were making more blanket stitches, because that's what you're doing. Okay, so you're going to come over a little bit, go through. Like I said on this one, I'm checking to see that I'm on the ribbon on the back. Push your needle part of the way through, loop under, and pull through until the thread is taut. I'm going to kind of wiggle this around a little bit so that I get those two strands together so they look like one. And there's my next stitch. I'm going to do one more so you can kind of see how this method allows the splice to blend. And I'm getting out of alignment a little bit, which I don't want to do. And I didn't quite make it on to the back side properly. Okay, I got it. And then loop under the needle, pull all the way through, and pull up tight. Now, you can tell where that splice is, but you wouldn't believe it. I'm trying to find another splice, but of course it's so perfect. Here's another splice right here, so you can see it actually does work pretty well. When you're hand stitching a piece and you want to add fiber fill, consider these things to get a nicely finished piece. Keep the stitches pretty close together. You can see these, get these out of your way. You can see these are pretty close together. Oh, and by the way, I just put my needle over here and I buried the tip of the needle like that so that I can get to every place that I need to get to and I won't get poked with needles. And tightly stuffing could push the front and the back apart and strain the hand stitches, so you want to avoid that. And then thirdly, leave about a 4-inch opening unless the piece is too small. Now I put a pin over here at the very beginning of my stitches so that as I'm stuffing it I won't be straining that stitch. And this is small, this piece, and I have about 3 inches, but it is so shallow that I'm going to be able to reach down inside quite easily. So stuff your toy by shoving fiber fill down in here, and I'm going to come over here to this first foot, and I need some more fiber fill. Just keep stuffing until you get it the way you like. This little piece is so small that it's not going to take a lot of stuffing. And I'll get that wrinkle out of there. There we are. And you could use a knitting needle. The blunt end works nicely to shove things down into nooks and crannies, but as I've mentioned, this piece is so small that it doesn't really need it. So let's put just a little bit more up here at the top. And I think that's going to be enough. And then I am going to pin. You can baste too if you think basting is better. I'm used to doing this, so I can pin it and be perfectly competent. Use your sharp pins again, and I'm going to go down through, come up, and then I'm going to bury my tip again, and then I'm going to keep coming around, matching up the edges, and then here's another pin going in strategic locations. And then it looks like I only need about one more pin. And we're getting to the end here and bury the tip. So off screen I'm going to finish stitching this so you can see how we finish off the motifs so it looks continuous. I've stitched all the way around. You can see that I've stitched all the way around till I've gotten back to my very first stitch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the blunt end of the needle under the top bar of the very first stitch, the one that we left a little slack, and I'm going to do it from front to back. So here we go. And I'm going to adjust that second stitch a little bit to kind of even things out, kind of get things. Now I've got two stitches that are pretty close together. I think that looks fine. And then I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to knip 2 anchor stitches like I had done before when we were splicing. So 2 anchor stitches, just a few threads is all you want. And you want to pull that snug, not scrunchy like I've said before. And here's the second stitch. There's the 2 anchor stitches, and then right by my knot and the 2 anchor stitches I'm going to come through one layer, so not the top layer. I'm coming through between the 2 layers and pull up, and then I'm going to cut here. And again, I'm leaving just a little bit of thread length on purpose from the anchor stitches, because if I would clip right here by the anchor stitches, they would unwind themselves. So best case in that situation is you would have a thread poking out. Worst case is you would cut it off and then it would all unwind itself, and you would have a hole. And they can be fixed, but you don't want that. So what I had done was I had slightly stuffed the bottom part a little bit puffier, and now you can just kind of even things out, and it looks real nice and puffy, but it's not real tight, and that's what I was concerned about with hand stitches. You don't want it to be super tight. Sometimes more is better, not in this situation. Two of the 1-yard cut and sew patterns have pillowcase and cushion cover options. Conga line girls, one for the girls, and red kick crowd, those are for the boys, have these options. Youth pillows are somewhere between 16 by 22 inches and 17 by 26 inches. These patterns are made for the larger size, and you can cut down for the smaller size. For the pillowcase, begin by cutting out the rectangle on this dark blue line. Well, back to our pillowcase project. We cut it out and then folded it in half, right sides together this time. That's typical sewing method. We've been doing top stitching where we put wrong sides together, so this is just a little different. And you want to fold it so that the motif is showing on one side And then this is the front of the motif, and then this is the back. A 1/2 inch seam allowance is built into the patterns. So you're going to stitch on one short side that's closest to the motif. You're going to leave more space down here for the hem. Well, this has been stitched with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and at the beginning and at the corner I did what's called a lock stitch. So I actually started back here, went backwards, and then came on forward. I could have started here, gone forward, back, so forth, but I didn't want to pile up too many stitches. And I did the same thing, lock stitches here at the corner. This is the corner of the pillowcase. And what we're going to have to do is to get out some of the bulk of fabric so that when we turn it, it will not bunch up. And so what you want to do is cut about half of the seam allowance off. So here we go. Cut off. And then we want to cut these little points off. And then I'm going to cut this point off. So that gives us a lot less bulk to turn. Over here, I'm going to do the same thing. Now I don't have the same condition, so I'm just going to go to cut off on one side. But I'm only going to cut off about half of the seam allowance so that I don't end up with a weak corner on the pillowcase. Now we want to press the seam open. We're not going to be able to get very far. Actually, this fit onto my ironing board just barely. So I'm able to press open almost to the end. I'm not going to be able to press open the bottom. So we'll work on that another way. And I'll show that to you. That's actually working quite well. If you have some problems, you can use a sprayer. This is a misting sprayer. I really like that. I doubt you can see it, but I'm going to try it. Can you see that? Probably not. Now I'm going to have to iron it to dry it. I'm using a steam iron too. Maybe you can hear that. Not sure. Then I'm going to turn the whole thing right side out. And try to get to our unpressed seam. And what we'll do is to press away from that crease with the tip of the iron and do like that. You'll have to work at it. It'll be a little more difficult at the corners, but I want you to have the concept of how this works. And then you can press right along there. So even though I couldn't get it onto the ironing board so I could press it open, this still will work very nicely. This is what's called an adjustable gauge, and that's because this little slider is adjustable and it goes down to 1/2 inch because that's where I want it. We're going to stick with the same dimension as the seam allowance for the turn down for the hem. So I'm going to put that right here, and I'm going to pull the fabric up until it meets this little lever right there, and then I'm going to pull it out, make sure that my seam aligns, and I'm going to pin it, and I'm going to have to get my hands in the way to get this pin in here. There we go. All right, then we're going to go along the way here, same method. We're going to bring the fabric right up to the mark, pull it out, and I'm going to get my hands in the way again. And we'll just keep going all the way around. Now, what I do want to mention is finger pressing. Now, this is finger pressing because you're pressing it with your finger and you're giving yourself a little bit of a head start on pressing with the iron. So I have completed the 1/2 inch turn down or turn under. I'm not sure if there's an official term for that or not. And now I'm ready to make the turn for the 2-inch hem. And you can see that I purposely positioned the head of the pin so that I can get to it. We'll go back to our gauge here, and we had it on 1/2 inch. Now we're going to adjust it to 2 inches. So there we are. Slide it under like we did before, and pull the gauge out, and then align the seam here just like we did before so that they match up. Again, I'm going to get my hands in the way to pin because I can't seem to do it without getting in your way. All right, so that's our first pin. And we're going to continue on around with our 2 inches. And now we're going to move things over. Okay, put our gauge back under there. Have it meet up to our 2-inch point. And pull the pin out. Get my hands in the way. And pin again. And I'll finish all the way around like this. And I'm going to take it to the machine. So when I come back, you will see a stitched hem. I mentioned that when I came back that the hem would be complete, but I thought maybe it would be a good idea to show you how it looks under the machine. The walking foot has all kinds of little marks because the needle is adjustable side to side. So I'm aligning the edge of the hem with this one that's closest to the needle on this side, so that I can hem close to the edge and stay consistent. So I'm going to put the presser foot down, and I'm not aligned quite the way I want to be. And there, that looks better. And then I'm going to start stitching. And let's see how we're doing back here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish this off camera, or finish it up off camera. This is the finished pillowcase. This is the front, and this is the back. Isn't it pretty and colorful? The hem is all sewn down nicely. The corners are square, and it's ready for the bed. Let's work on the cushion cover now. Its maximum will be 17 inches by 28 inches after it's stitched. Measure the cushion you would like to use. This is my cushion. It's not really a cushion. It's a mock-up. And you'll see something interesting here in just a few minutes. Make yourself a sketch and make notes of the dimensions of your cushion. So let's measure this. This is my measuring tape, and its width is 20 inches, and its other dimension, I can't see it over there, is 14 inches. So here we are. That's what I want you to do. And then add the following dimensions to these dimensions. So add 1/4 inch total to the length, so that would make it 20 inches plus 1/4, and then 14 inches the opposite direction plus 1/4, and that is for ease. You want your cushion cover to be snug, but you don't want it to be binding. Then you add another 1/2 inch on 3 or 4 sides. Now this assumes that that the pattern that you see behind you will work. We're going to talk about that soon. And so depending on the number of the seams, if you have 3 seams, you'll add 1/2 inch on 3 sides, or if you have 4 seams, you'll add another 1/2 inch on 4 sides. So now let's measure the motif to make sure that it does fit here. You may have a clue what's going on here. This one that's my farthest most point, and then I need to come out over here, and it's 21.5, 22 inches. Uh-oh, we're in a bad direction that way. And this one's about 12. We could get away with that, but we can't get away with the length. So when that should occur, the option could be to bring in my option here. This is Strider from the fat quarter, and you could make yourself a cushion cover that does fit your cushion and sew it on before you put it together. I wish you great fun in making, and equally great fun to the children who become owners of XKids toys and pillows.